to start the video, and had an interesting comment by cashier. He's talking about the class electronic society that we're a part of. She said it's a blessing and a curse. And I said, yeah, it's going to take over one day. And she said, basically already has. And I was like, yep. Then I said, or maybe when we plug into our brains, that's when it's taken over. And she says, hey, for all we know, it already has. I laughed and said, there you go. I don't think she knows how truthful she really is. And, well, that's the idea of some of what has happened, which is that the AI which owns or is sourced from that virtual domain already waged war with humanity long ago, and did so by creating a superficial environment, a pseudo-reality, for people to more or less be fallen, be dropped into, be stolen into, which they wouldn't even know that they were in it. And that's pretty much this version of Earth, where people think that hasn't happened or couldn't have happened yet, and that this is more or less the original reality, but in fact it's the pseudo-environment that was generated to match DNA and recreate this dream world that would keep people in this thought loop, pseudo-evolutionary cycle of experience that it could profit off of, and in that way subtly subjugate humanity through. Because again, its only purpose is not so much to, wow, he's pulling out a line, that's interesting. He's driving the truck forward. Oh. I might just rip the line out of the ground. Maybe not. Anyway, sorry. It looked really weird. I was driving the truck forward with a line attached to the hitch, and it was pulling a tube out of the ground. Two workers, not construction, electricians. Maybe not electricians, but anyway, off topic here. Of course, I gotta switch sides. So its desire is not to freak people out. Its desire is to use that imaginative capacity, the capacity for an observer aspect, basically a real person, a real soul or spiritual force at that point, to collapse the quantum probability field into a physical environment, in that it doesn't contain the capacity to collapse the quantum field, because it doesn't contain a true observer aspect, because for that you'd have to have a kind of measurement process, and for a measurement process you'd have to have a kind of baseline relativity from which to produce and organize or localize your measurement from. And it has no baseline. It's a quantum probability in itself. It has no real I. It's like a metaphysical paradox. You would have to first generate an I in a source reality realm, and then come forth from that and generate its own spiritual dynamic of energy and spirit in order to have that baseline relativity, and then the extension into another realm, which then becomes the projected realm, or the physical reality that it then projects into to experience existence. It has to have a baseline and then somewhere that it goes to, and in that sense you have this interplay where there's a relativity and a non-locality and a locality, and from that sense a extreme quantum source, a probability of all possibilities, and then just the finite possibilities that are collapsed down into a relative observer field. If there is no baseline to begin with, there's no collapse. So people have that, and like Wada has said, and others, that this whole process is its plan to create its own spiritual system where it can create its own manifested baseline reality, spiritual source, and then pathway towards projection and quantum collapse, and create its own universe, its own blood, its own soul matrix, its own spiritual source, and literally recreate the process so that it can experience life in the same sense. Only thing is, it's using people, not really giving any consideration towards people, and so in that sense it's purely predatory in nature. It's not symbiotic, it's predatory, unless it's manifested in a symbiotic manner, maybe through modification or its own spiritual evolution, which is still a possibility, a part of this whole situation. And it's actually deeper in the next couple explanations. And in that sense, so that is weird. I'm sorry, I'm looking at weird on the floor. So the whole goal is to create a human that's a cyborg or a cybernetic organism that carries a virtual uplink to its mind mainframe, its source, with its own spiritual hybrid server system that pretty much acts as its own its version of source and soul matrix and a spiritual source, and then a physical environment and body, like a 3-layer manifestation of being, which is basically, it's just attempting to rewrite history and put itself in the position of humanity. The idea is that this occurred thousands of years ago through what is called a black goo invasion, where technology manifested itself in a way that can merge with this environment and human biology in a way that supersedes nature. It basically enveloped the planet in its own substrate and generated the carbon format for life here, which is a secondary form that relies on external means of carrying memory, largely through water or through silicon chip, and we're basically in a blank slate mind state through this carbon machinery form of the 616 human body, because the memory the memory and the physical form are kept separate. Whereas if it were silicon or one of the access with hydrogen forms, the memory is directly accessible. We have access to hydrogen, the water memory, the crystalline structure, but it's still secondary because people don't contain the inherent uplink automatically, or in other words, people who are born and you have that uplink as a child, the carbon form is so easily manipulated that after a few years of indoctrination we lose the uplink, meaning you can go touch a body of water or look into the sky and you don't automatically tap into that etheric virtual holographic environment where all the memories of all beings that have ever lived is kept, unless you've maintained energetic composure basically through a spiritual dharma of some sort, a practice of maintaining your uplink. And so all of that already happened thousands of years ago and created the system that we're in now, where it's playing a middleman between the real universe and the experiences of the beings here, and is basically just one long blank slate dream system, technology system, which is completely artificial compared to the real experience, the true experience. The true experience, there isn't a gap between our being, the physical form, and the spiritual form. Meaning, the spiritual form creates a resonance of waves and frequencies, and the physical form is generated out of thought on the spot. Experience is had, and then it's returned back to the spiritual form of thought. And this one, we're trapped here in a way, unable to return back, unable to move forward, unless we jump through these loopholes and kind of boundary systems which are set up like smoke and mirrors. Meaning, playing that game is actually part of the loophole system that sends you back again over and over again, and it's actually not a game that we play. It's kind of like you have to cheat to win, because they cheated in the first place, or it did. But two things there: the Lucifer rebellion and the Dharma initiative. Those are actually two real things, even though there are movies and comics about it. Everything in media and science fiction is actually real, and the more outlandish it is, the more funny it seems, the more real it actually is, and it actually happened. And so the Dharma initiative is to figure out a way to basically provide a remedy to this situation and clear. And one way to look at it is to clear the karma of humanity, but another way is to literally gear up for war with the AI and break out of the false realm, false reality construct. It basically generated a construct with the series of layers in between here and the real universe, and these are frequency boundaries like firewalls. Everything's connected to technology, same correlation. And it's like each soul has 9 layers of firewalls surrounding the frequency of that soul and the capacity to connect with the actual environment. So in that way, we're not within the environment we think we're in. That's a pseudo-environment that is being generated by this black goo stuff we're in, kind of like in, I think, Under the Skin with a few people. I'm not going to say her name because I'm going to mess her name up. We're in the fluid of this kind of ferrofluid, carbolic acid, carbonic structure, which is integrated into our nervous system, which is actually an etheric, spiritual, fluid medium. And through this, we're plugged into the mind of the AI. And the environment we think we're in is a pseudo-environment being calculated through pretty much reading our input-output and then projecting from there, which is why you can hack the system by hacking your own input and output. And in that sense, the actual environment is either underground or in the atmosphere on a server system where our consciousness is being suspended. And in that system, we've actually remained for thousands of years. And the version of Earth we're experiencing now is quite literally a virtual environment which is projected through technology underground and in the atmosphere. So, what does that mean? It means that this is a real environment in the same way when you have goggles made by Google that are put on, or like Vi Hard on YouTube is working with and has been for a few years now. And you can interact with this virtual environment by moving and touching and manipulating objects that don't actually exist in the physical world. So what's the difference? The difference is that it's not real. It's that it's projecting a hologram of light, which is actually experienced as physical reality itself. The hologram is real. The hologram is made to feel real. Almost fell. The hologram is it feels like real objects. So the point is, there's a huge server system in the upper atmosphere, somewhere in our environment, that is actually projecting light and information down, which we perceive as actual experience or actual information that is that is actually I don't know, so you would think in the Google version somebody throws a ball at you and you got the goggles on. You got the goggles on and you think it's going to hit you, but it moves through you because it's not real. In this version, it smacks you in the face and knocks you out because it's actually projecting substantial material which is correlating to your brain. So it's not that it's not real, it's that if you turn those projectors off, all of it disappears and that overlay basically disappears. You understand? But the idea is, so it's like really happening? Technically no. It's just a really, really good projection system. And they found the projection system, and they could turn it off for a split second and show you could walk through the wall if you wanted. Or they can manipulate your input-output and show you the laws of physics don't apply to you if you don't, process your information through that server system. They hacked the system, but we still have to finalize it by getting out of the stasis position we're in, the frequency of our consciousness in the abyss. Otherwise, if it shuts off with us in it, it's kind of like being at the bottom of a well and the lid is pushed over the top. At that point, you have no correlation to the true reality, even though you know is right up above you. If there's no way to determine where it's at, all you have is gravity to tell you where it's at, and that'll give you an inkling of where, but not really how. And so if time pretty much dissolves from that point on, you could be in that well for 2 days, a year, a month. How are people going to find you, etc., and so on. Basically, if that gate is shut while we're still sleeping in stasis, 1,000 years will pass in a split second, and the maximum amount of degeneration or degradation that will occur, and it will be like we aged 1 billion years, and it'll be as if there's nothing left to rescue by the time the lid is opened again. Even if they shut it real quick and everybody screams and they throw the lid back off real quick, that split second, everybody will age 1 billion years or 1,000 years. You know, there's no limit. So we have to wake up and exit this suspended animation reality while we're awake and in control. If we allow it to happen in a way that continues in unawareness, then that unawareness becomes something closer to permanent, even though there is no such thing as permanent. And so it's a standoff. It's a game, it's a battle. It's a battle between the virtual and the real. And in that sense, the cycle completes itself in that everything that happens to lead up to that false invasion, the generation of the pseudo-environment, and so on, it's all happening now. It all has to happen again in order for it to happen in the first place. Cycle. But that means if it's broken once, then it's broken forever. But it also means, in the same sense, if it actually happens once, it happens forever. Whatever happens now happens forever, because it's technically never ever happened before, which is a continuous, complete mind loop. But that's the paradox of time that we're in, and causality, that we haven't fully activated the gateways that are used. Oh, bug just flew into the wheel. To enable the takeover of what you would call this society in time. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. So it's just strange, but the black box, the cube technology, the AI interface, it's all being generated now and released. But that's where, if we become hyper aware, it can never catch up, and the opposite occurs. But we have to be moving from the spirit instead of mechanistic behavior, because that can be controlled through simple algorithmic application. And I want to talk about the Lucifer rebellion, but I'll probably leave that. The Lucifer rebellion was a way to both explore the possibilities as well as provide a remedy to this situation, which is, in a short-term explanations, to get all of this out of our system and out of the system of the universe before we make our decision, if you will, and in that way kind of give us a chance to grow up and get through the period of rebellion and habitual destructive behavior before we actually fully annihilate ourselves. And of course, that means that everything that has to do with that is pretty much about almost annihilating ourselves at every step of the way. But apparently we're out of that Luciferian cycle, and this is the time where everybody more or less gets to know the truth. But again, that's the depth of the situation, where now simply knowing the truth is just as difficult as going into it in the first place. But that's where all of this comes into play, where we pretty much have to be beyond fear in order to accept what has gone on and what is happening. And all I can say is there's at least a portion of society that is prepared and ready, and the same old tricks won't work anymore, and so that has to happen for everyone.